All right, so we're going to talk about writing introductions, and we're coming at this after we've planned what our body paragraphs are. It's really important that you think about introductions after you've got an idea of what your essay is actually going to be discussing, because one of the key functions of the introduction is to tell the reader what the rest of the essay will be about. And you can't really do that until you know what the rest of the essay will be about. And that's why we went through this planning process already. So this is in relation to 3 body paragraphs. What will be your central topic for each of those body paragraphs in relation to the question? So we've already broken down the question and we thought about how we might break that down. The other thing you should think about with your question, like this one here, is there are often more than one aspect to the question, and your body paragraphs should be tackling each of those aspects when relevant. So in this one here, the word odyssey has become synonymous with a long, wandering and eventful journey. Discuss the way Homer's Odyssey can be seen as a template to another hero's journey with which we are familiar. So in this case here, obviously we need to talk about the Odyssey, the text that we've been looking at, but you also need to be able to link it with another text that you're familiar with. So every body paragraph needs to be able to make that connection in some way. So whatever you put in here, let's say it might be the film The Matrix, you need to be able to talk about those connections. Now, by this time you've already thought about each topic. So different aspects of a hero's journey might be the call to adventure, the trials and the return. So these are the central topics, and you're going to connect them with each of them. So you ought to be finding some points to say about the call to adventure, some points and evidence to talk about the trials, and so on for the return. And then find the links with your second text. So you've already done this sort of planning. You know kind of what your essay, the body of your essay will consist of. Now to link that to the introduction, now that we know what our body paragraphs will be about, we can start putting it in the introduction. Now just to refresh your memory, we talked about the fact that the supporting details, the evidence within your body paragraphs, each of these work towards supporting whatever the topic sentence was. Okay, supporting that. And we briefly made the point the other day that your introduction ought to have an overarching point, some overarching point that addresses this question. So on its own, each one of these points doesn't address the question by itself. Together, they do. So you need to find some overarching point that links all of these ideas into some general comment. Now that general comment, that overarching point, we call the thesis. Now once you know what the thesis is, which is your overarching point, just like these supporting evidence or supporting sentences and evidence and quotes from the text support the topic sentence, each of those topic sentences need to in some way support what you're saying in the thesis. So there's a relationship between the introduction and the body paragraphs there. One way to think about the thesis then, it's kind of like the topic sentence for the whole essay. The topic sentence does the same job for the essay that the topic sentence does for the paragraphs. In the same way, the paragraphs themselves do the same job in the essay that the supporting sentences do for the paragraph. Do you see that connection? Okay, so the supporting sentences support the topic sentence, the paragraphs support the thesis. So the topic sentence does the same, or the thesis does the same job for the essay as the topic sentence for the paragraph, and the paragraphs themselves do the same job for the essay that the supporting sentences do for the paragraphs there. Another way to think about the introduction is forget for a moment that you're writing an essay. Let's say for a moment that you're actually just asked to write one paragraph in response to that. If you're only to write one paragraph in response to that, that essentially is your introduction. You might need to make some slight modifications to it, but you're just making some very central points about that question, putting it all into one paragraph. You're not going to go into any evidence from the text or whatever because you just don't have room in a paragraph. You're just going to make some general points that we've got the call to adventure, the trials and the return. And if you can put all that into one paragraph, without a bit of fine-tuning, that's basically your introduction. But let's just clarify what your introduction needs. Yes, it needs a thesis. It needs what we call, especially for these sorts of essays that you're taking home to do, you might not always put it in an exam situation, but this is still very worthwhile putting in there. Nutshell sentence. What a nutshell sentence is, just capturing a key aspect of the text's plot. With this particular question, you probably need to put 2 nutshell sentences in, one for the Odyssey and one for your second text that you're talking about. So you don't want to go into any detail about the whole plot of the Odyssey, but you might just capture it. The Odyssey, which tells the story of a Greek hero, Odysseus, and his long 20-year journey to get back to his home in Ithaca. That's a nutshell sentence. Just what's the plot in a nutshell. The other thing that you need to put in there are introduce the key points. Introduce the key points that you'll be covering. And that are these things. The topic sentences are basically providing what the key points you're going to be discussing. So in this case, the Odyssey does serve as a template to the Matrix in the way that it has trials that the hero must overcome, a return back home, and a call to adventure. As often as possible, or at least a couple of times within it, try to use the keywords from the question. This is very important because if you don't do this, it's very common that people get sidetracked and they're not answering what the question's asking for. So use keywords like, does it act as a template? Here is some good keywords there. Someone might actually decide to structure their essay in terms of a hero's journey being long and eventful and try and work those words into the paragraphs too. Now, incidentally, with this particular one, I've deliberately put call to adventure, even though in the Odyssey that seems to be lacking in the book, The Odyssey. The call to adventure for Odysseus happens in the epic prior to it, the Iliad, where the Greeks are on their way to Troy. So that's where the call to adventure is. But I put it here deliberately to show you that in the planning process you might think, well, actually, that's probably not the best point to start with. So I might switch this around and make this one paragraph 3 and this one paragraph 2 and this one paragraph 1. I'll go into this kind of order. Because by making this paragraph 3, I can make the point, even though the Odyssey, as presented by Homer, doesn't have a call to adventure, the hero, Odysseus, when we look at his whole adventure, starting from the beginning of the Iliad, does follow that hero's journey template. So don't run away from those sorts of contradictions. You might think, I can't talk about that because it's not in the Odyssey. Don't run away from that. You can actually use that to your advantage and show that you're thinking in a very precise way. You're thinking, no, it's not actually in the Odyssey, but I can demonstrate that as a hero's journey, Odysseus does go through this, even though it's in a different text. So, nutshell sentence, introduce the key points, keywords from the question. Now, something that is kind of optional, but it's good if you can put it in there, is putting in an engaging opening. An engaging opening is just getting the reader interested in what you're going to write about. You might not go straight into responding to the question just yet. In other words, the thesis doesn't have to be... This is one place where the thesis is a bit different to the topic sentence. We always encourage the topic sentence to be the first sentence of the paragraph. The thesis doesn't necessarily need to be the first sentence of your essay. It can be, but it could be after you just talk about heroes' journeys generally. You might make a point about how ordinary people go on or have aspects of heroes' journeys in their own lives, or that it's a common genre within films and literature. You can make general points about the topic before you go into the thesis statement there. Okay, so essentially this is your introduction. It's got all of those bits there. The order that you put all those bits in doesn't really matter. Some of these things you can actually merge. Oh, actually, there's one more thing. You need to introduce the texts themselves. Name the texts. If it's another novel, name the writer of the other novel for this one here. If it's a film, you could name the director of the film. But sometimes you might actually merge those two things. For instance, when you introduce the texts, you can make that part of the nutshell sentence. So Homer's The Odyssey, introduce the text, is a story of the hero Odysseus and his 20-year journey back home. So in one sentence, you've actually got both of those things covered. Okay, so that's essentially how to write an introduction.